The fight over Iraq's largest oil refinery rages on today as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria continues its push towards Baghdad. Earlier today, President Obama finally spoke out on the advances of the Islamic terror group, and military options are not off the table.
We will be prepared to take targeted and precise military action if and when we determine that the situation on the ground requires it.
Well, he did stress, however, that this will not include boots on the ground.
Let me repeat what I've said in the past. American combat troops are not going to be fighting in Iraq again.
But in the end, he went back to the old well, ducking ownership and, of course, blaming Bush.
But what's clear from the last decade is the need for the United States to ask hard questions before we take action abroad, particularly military action.
Okay, Ange, you want to summarize? I mean, he laid out 5 points, and we want to go into it. But, you know, the takeaway, at least, no boots on the ground, but military options on the table.
Okay, so he's going to send some advisors over. It's a little bit of a contradiction because he blamed Maliki for not giving legal authority, or immunity, I should say, for U.S. troops earlier. But do these current advisors have any kind of legal immunity? It's a pretty good question. We'll ask.
They say they don't need it.
I guess they don't need it now.
That's what
okay.
they say.
It's a very hypocritical, contradictory administration. I don't see what these advisors are going to do, Eric. I don't see what airstrikes are going to do. I don't understand why we would bomb and hurt a number of civilians, just, I think, delaying the inevitable, because ISIS is a group that essentially hugs the population. It's too late. It is sliding into a sectarian civil war. It is not the job of the United States of America to come in and defend Maliki and his 900-person army and the Shia militia if they can't do it themselves. So I would have liked what President Obama did better if he would have said, I'm not going to do anything. Okay. I'm not. Let them fight it out.
Hey, let them fight it out. Bob, Jennifer Griffin reported earlier that ISIS is becoming more of an army than a terror group. Would that change the game for you?
Well, no, it doesn't change the game at all. I mean, I think this is, as I've said oftentimes, this was predictable. We could have seen this coming when we invaded Iraq. The fact is there are a lot of Shiites out there yet to fight. And so I would not be so quick to give up Baghdad here or to give up that oil refinery. There's a lot of questions about whether, in fact, this group has it or not. But the fact that there was a lack of intelligence is what bothers me. The thing was, you can't put together something like this and start moving on the largest oil refinery in the country and not know something about it. Apparently,
so
we didn't.
What do? Did Obama make the right call, saying
yes, absolutely,
300 up to 300 security advisors, as Andrea points out, and maybe some air missions, targeted and precise military action.
Yeah, I think that's about all you're going to do. What else are you going to do?
I don't know. Dave, your thoughts on his on what the package President Obama presented?
Well, yesterday, President Obama invited the bipartisan congressional leaders to the Oval Office, and the reports out of that, including from Nancy Pelosi, was that the president had not come to any firm decisions and that it was more just of a general discussion. Less than 24 hours later, the president, I guess, maybe felt compelled to come to the podium to say that he was going to send these 300 security advisors. I think that he also made a case today for why it was irresponsible, dangerously so, to leave Iraq without a status of forces agreement in 2011. However, I'm also, at this point, just realistic and logical, and you sometimes just have to be for what is going to happen. So what is going to happen here? You have 300 advisors. Can they go and recommend something to President Obama that he will accept? Chances are, no. If you look at most of the security advisors that have left the administration, including Secretary Gates and Secretary Clinton, two of the main things that they recommended were rejected by President Obama. So I don't know. I'm open to hearing what these advisors will recommend, but as Andrea said, once these terrorists, as their tactic is, to get themselves immersed into the population, into the civilian population, I'm not exactly sure what we will be able to do. My last point is, President Obama took the oath to preserve, protect, and defend the country. I believe that he takes that oath very seriously. I do not understand yet, and I'm willing to have an open mind on it, how inaction actually will allow him to fulfill that obligation.
All right, let me ask you this. A lot of people have floated the idea of splitting up Iraq into three groups, where the Sunnis, the Kurds, and the Shiites each get their own area of the country. President Obama addressed that, saying the U.S. will not pursue any avenue that will benefit one sect over another inside Iraq. But when you think about it, most important part of Iraq is the oil installations in the southern and the water ports. That's where the most value is. Who gets that and who decides that?
Well, where they are is in with the Shia, and where they are is with the Kurds. Where they're not is with the Sunnis. So what you have to do is when you look at all three, if you had to pick a group that acted like adults and was totally thankful for the U.S. help prior to the invasion, it's the Kurds. We said, we're going to give you a no-fly zone after you were gassed. They said that's all we need. We are an enterprising country that evidently looks like Western Europe. So right now they need some protection. They got rusty old guns going against our new stuff, which the Sunnis have taken away because the Shia have dropped their uniforms and weapons, and they have our Humvees, and they have a few tanks, and they have all our weaponry, and they're using it possibly against our advisors. But those advisors are going in now to advise things on the ground to help those who don't want to fight. I ask you this. When there is a warrant put out for the vice president's arrest because he's Sunni, is that a hint that maybe things are going afoul? I ask you, in February, when Fallujah falls to this ISIS group, is that a hint that something's going afoul? Why are we waiting till today, let alone last Friday, to start taking this action?
That raises the question why we allowed Malaki to stay in office in the first place. He was elected by the people. He was elected by the people with a promise.
Can I
he was
build
going
on
to include
that?
the Sunnis were going to be included in the government, and he reneged on it.
Well, but expand. But you say, why are we waiting before we do what?
If you wanted to affect things subtly and behind the scenes, number one, a residual force. But having said that, there was no legitimate push to get a residual force in there to keep our leverage on the ground and keep Iran out after we brought peace to that region, and they ran on it and they got elected on it. But having said all this, I want to build on what you said. You said that why isn't the intelligence better? The reason why the intelligence better is because we totally pulled out and we left. Why is Maliki allowed to do what he's doing? Is because
Maliki told us to leave.
He lost.
And
no,
we did.
He didn't. And
President Obama never
really,
he never, but Brian, you're asking President Obama to do something that he never wanted to do. He's actually now calling for a political solution in a country that was never ready for democracy. It is deeply rooted, let me finish. It was deeply rooted in ethnic hatred from the get-go, never ready for democracy.
Right.
And we made the mistake of thinking that somehow that they're marching when they have people's heads on a stick. They're federalists.
Those are the terrorists. They're different from the Sunnis that we work with to get the surge going.
Well,
Much different.
We don't know who. Part of the problem is we're not sure who we're arming, who we're backing, and they keep jumping from one country to another, changing flags, dropping stuff, running, taking the uniforms off. Here's where you get in real trouble. When you start playing games with people who hate you, when you start negotiating with people who hate you. Can you roll it?
We are interested in communicating with Iran to make clear that the Iranians know what we're thinking and we know what they're thinking.
Our view is that Iran can play a constructive role if it is helping to send the same message to the Iraqi government that we're sending, which is that Iraqi only holds together if it's inclusive.
Bring it around again, Ange. Is this a dangerous, dangerous tactic to play games negotiating with Iran?
Absolutely. They're not our friends. They're already in, which is the biggest threat. They already are. They do have a presence with the Quds Force already in Iraq. We should not be talking to Iran. But again, we're expecting President Obama to somehow act in a way that he's not wired to act. This is the same president that said, let's allow NATO to nuclear disarm the western portion of Europe. Why? Why? Because he said that Iran wasn't a threat. So, I mean, I can't follow this White House, so I would much rather have us out of that region and not participating in that region rather than do what they've done up until this point, which is ignore all the signs, ignore the advice from military leaders. This is not a president who's committed to just about anything, let alone getting involved in a crisis, a civil war in the Middle East, which he seems very comfortable allowing them to gain their caliphate. And if he's not comfortable with it, he's certainly making it very easy for them to do.
One of the things, first of all, Joe Biden was the first one who suggested the tripartite of Iran, and wasn't a bad idea. But I hate to say this.
President Obama and John Kerry just both said we're going to work with Iran.
Well,
what a mistake that is.
The one thing that is almost certain is that Saddam Hussein, as much as we disliked him, was the one person who kept the Iranians in check.
Okay,
he
now
lost
what do we do?
people.
Okay, please, I love you, brother. I love you.
But you
got to stay on
talk
top
about this stuff.
We're
without looking
talking
at the
about
history
President
of it.
Obama and John Kerry, Secretary of State, saying they're going to negotiate with the people who want us off the map and want Israel off the map.
There's one thing the Iranians don't want is to have a Sunni take over Baghdad. So maybe, just maybe, they may have some intelligence that would help. It never should have gotten this in the first place because we never should have been there.
Should we trust the Iranians, Dana?
Well, and I think what the administration is trying to tell us is that you don't have a choice, because I actually think that I'm fine to argue the 2003 invasion as long as we also then are honest about what happened in 2011, which we've kind of talked about here. Can I mention one thing about John Kerry? Yeah. So one of the things President Obama says today is that he is sending Secretary Kerry now to Iraq to deal with it. Do you know that in the last several months there have been no high-level contacts between the Obama administration and anyone in Iraq? So now we're sending the Secretary of State, who has spent the last almost 2 years on a failed mission to try to bring the Israelis and the Palestinians together, when they're basically allowing Iraq to go further and further into a politically and diplomatic terrible situation. So now John Kerry has to go back and try to fix a problem that I just don't see that the administration laid it out today.
I hate to be blatant about this, but do we care what Iraq falls into?
Yes.
Why?
What happened in Afghanistan?
They beat the hell out of the Brits. They beat the hell out of the Soviets.
And Al-Qaeda just sat there and had a nesting place. This group is worse than Al-Qaeda, according to Al-Qaeda. So let's just leave them alone and arm them with our stuff.
We're going to stop them? You want to put boots on the ground and stop it? You want to put the Air Force in there and stop it?
There's absolutely ways to do it, and ignoring it is not the way to do it.
Bob, how would you suggest then that America is actually going to be able to fulfill its obligation to protect the country from terrorist attacks if we allow a safe haven that's crossing borders, erasing borders from 1916, and having all of this territory in order to bring foreign fighters to that area to fight and come back into our countries? How do you expect us to
There are
fight
other
that?
places they will try to do that. I think we're much better equipped to do it. We have no reason except to protect Israel.
You have no faith in government except for
I have no faith in being able to look at history and say that the Iranians and the Afghanis are going to be brought under control. It's absurd.
Well, what about the terrorists that will? What if it's just a lone wolf? How are you going to track them?
Well, I assume the Homeland Security is.
Yeah, you assume. That's what bothers me. I am
you want to put 20,000 troops on the ground to find
Nobody is. Who in the world? Please, if you could just show me who has suggested sending 20,000 troops.
When Obama said we're going to,
Obama says that because he's fighting against something that doesn't exist. No one has suggested sending 20,000 troops.
Okay, so without troops in Iraq, is there any chance to save Iraq?
There was. Listen, 2011, it was done. They took their hands off the wheel and turned around. They had a responsibility to monitor it like they did Japan and Germany, and the president pulled out because he didn't like the
war. The one thing I didn't bring you today was list of things that happened in 2011.
When Allison goes like this means wrap. We got to wrap the segment up. We went almost 13 minutes. Next up.